Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 823. 823. This is for Monday, the 25th of October, 2021. The weekly show that's all about weather. And this is the pre-show, that magical, marvelous, wonderful, amazing time of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and on occasion, we say outrageous things. Got a fun show coming up tonight, I think. But first off, I got to get the embed code going here for the TV folks. We are back on television tonight. We are all slowly recovering from a little cyber attack here within the company. So we got that going, and let's get everybody invited so we can get this thing rolling on time. Just got an email from Bill Murray. It's got all kind of stuff on here. I mean, it's about to make my head spin. I'm the world's worst producer of these shows because sometimes I get kind of sidetracked and start doing other things. All right, I think that's everybody. So let's get the invite going. So weather's pretty active across the country. We'll do a weather roundup today. And we got some breaking news here. I guess I'll play the breaking news thing here.
We interrupt this program for a CBS Radio Net Alert Bulletin.
Good sources tell me that the email officer torch has been passed from Aubrey to Jen. Wow. How did that happen? So anyway, we'll do what we're going to do, a long email segment tonight with Jen. Kevin passed the torch. I mean, at some point it's time to pass the torch. I'll agree with that. I mean, so Aubrey has passed the email officer torch over to Jen, so she'll be doing that. And, we got a loaded show coming up here tonight. I've got so many notes here from Dr. Murray, and Bill is our guest booking officer. Bill does all of the guest bookings for the show here. So he typically does the interview segment, and I get him in and get him out, and I'll get on here and yak away for just a little bit. But he does most of the really hard work in putting these things together. Hi, Kim. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing? Good.
I'm sitting here trying to digest Bill Murray's message here, the production notes for the show tonight.
That's a lot. The guest that's going to be talking about 13 minutes. I don't know if you'd seen our email exchange earlier a week or two ago, but I don't know if you recognize the name. Travis Farncombe is the guy who had funded the Impact 360 Alliance.
Okay, I got that connection. Know exactly. Okay. This is cool. All right. And that's going to be a fun show. I'm excited. I think this is going to be good.
Yeah.
All right. So
we just found out you're in charge of introducing the movie guest, Kim. So good luck.
You're kidding, right?
No, I was serious, but I can be kidding if you want me to be.
Well, how about this? If you'd like to introduce them, since you did the booking and you'd be the person they're familiar with, something I was just talking with James about, the fact that he and I served on a steering committee for an organization that Travis had started. So I think that'll be,
you smooth talker.
Be a way that we can transition into the movie effort.
All right, I will work on that. Since Neil's going to ask Paul lots of questions.
I'm trying to go through the production notes. We hit the recorded segments at 8:10.
No, don't you be making fun of my production notes. This is the first time we ever had any.
I'm about to say we've never had production notes on the show before. This is a whole new thing here. So
a lot of moving parts tonight.
All right. So I'll set alarms and bells and whistles to go off at 10 minutes after the 8 o'clock hour Central Time, not Eastern Time, but Central Time. And Jen, you're doing, you're going to talk about the new newsletter, right?
Yep. And I'll do the emails. I have about 3. I can do 3 from earlier in the month.
Aubrey, did you pass the torch to Jen?
Is that who the torch went to?
That's me.
She just passed it. She didn't know who she was passing it to. The first person that said yes was going to be the recipient of the torch.
Yeah, I'm the sucker. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, it's an honor to take the torch from you, but you can have it back whenever you like.
If I ever stop doing the 10 and 11 o'clock show on Monday nights, you got it.
Sounds like a plan.
We've had multiple email officers on this show over the years. They just, at some point, you just got to pass the torch.
I've had it for quite some time. It's
You have.
been a number of years.
You have.
I
You're the longest
there's no
running
doubt.
email officer.
I didn't know
torch
this
has been
was
passed.
anyone else. You've done it the entire time I've been involved. I had no idea it was ever anyone other than you. I thought you'd created it.
It was, I took it from Kevin when he went off the show, not this last time, but the time before that.
Oh,
Right.
the first time.
No, I don't think it was the first time.
So I see Troy is missing, but I think everybody else is here. Anybody heard from Troy? Do we need to? We'll just get this thing going here. So,
He'll come along here before it's over with.
okay. Well, let's just roll it here. And we are on television. Welcome to our television viewers. Thank you so much for watching. This is the pre-show of WeatherBrains. We're about to start the shoe. And again, for those watching on the television side, we have changed times. We are now on at 7 o'clock Central every Monday night. So I know a lot of weather dweebs, dorks, nerds, and weenies watch this show on television. So just remember, we're not at the older time of 8. We're now back at 7 Central time. So, and hopefully we'll stay here for a while. We can't back it up anymore because that'll interfere with the 6 o'clock snooze back here. So Troy is here. The gang is all here. So here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains, episode number 823. The show that's all about weather, the Monday night weather party for weather dweebs and nerds all over the world. Welcome, Troy Kimmel. You just joined us. Are you doing okay? How you doing? What's happening in Texas?
It's getting there.
I see it's beginning to look like your old place now. It's starting to look like you.
Big fire hazard, but no, it's getting back in, kind of shuffled into place, and I'm just trying to remain calm, remain calm through the process.
That's all you can do.
Yep.
Now, and by the way, Bill Murray sent me some production notes. We've never had production notes on this show before.
Man.
So I will do my
Not
best.
production notes. They're just giving you a heads up.
Now, I remember, didn't
tonight.
somebody tell us we're not supposed to just go around and introduce the guests? We're just supposed to go right into it. I mean, somebody did somebody say that to us one time?
James, are we going to get we're going to get TV consultant to tell us what to do with it? In that case,
there you go.
Yeah. See y'all.
We're out.
In 16 years, they probably said everything that can be said about the show.
I remember the as I've told y'all before about the TV consultant. It was one of the few times I ever got to meet with a TV consultant. After this, never did I get to afterwards, but had a TV consultant one time tell me, really, you should not be mentioning viewpoint because the public, and I will quote now, the public is too stupid to understand it. And of course, I made the statement back to the young lady, sorry about this, but I looked and I said, I don't think it's the public that's too stupid. I think it's TV consultants.
Yeah.
And that was the last time I ever met James with a TV consultant.
We could do TV consultant brains real easily here. I will never forget one TV consultant said, it's not about the weather. The key to ratings, it's hand gestures. He gave me a list of 30 different hand gestures, 30 of these things. And he told me how to put them into rotation. Yeah. And of course, I wanted to give him one hand gesture, but I didn't do that.
There's your show title. What a nasty little turn the show is taking tonight.
Yeah. No, we're going down the two. Aubrey, have you ever had a consultant deal with you before?
Uh-oh.
Yes. And they put so much makeup on me. I looked like
birthday cake.
I don't know if I can use the word on here. I had a little phrase. Had a little phrase I would use, but it was so much on my eyes. It was like falling into my face.
Oh boy. But that's going to take you right to the top. So, Jen, you have the blessing of doing radio. You don't deal with these people, do you?
No, I do not. I just sit here. I get to wear my hat and just talk. Now, I've had plenty of criticism and that, don't say this. But there's only so much you can do in 30 seconds. So they really don't give me a hard time.
Yeah. Now, one guy, he gave me a 2-hour presentation on how to get the glare off my bald head. 2 hours of powder types and application methods, and that's going to take us to number one. It always does. So, And Kim, you don't live in this world. Kim, you've never dealt with a TV consultant, have you?
I haven't, but I do have media relations people on both the university side and the NOAA side. And I was told when I was learning to do media interviews, and I quote, to never say anything that I wouldn't want to say in front of the NOAA administrator, which is really funny now.
It is really funny.
Neil, your thoughts on that?
So I actually went through like a formal media training course at the request of a lot of people at NOAA. So I think maybe that tells you what they thought of my ability. They gave me a list of a whole bunch of things.
Hey, Paul, we're coming to you, man. We're coming to you. So, I knew he'd shake his head there.
We have media relations folks as well. So, yeah.
All right. Before we totally go unhinged, let's bring in Bill, who's going to kind of explain where we're going on the show tonight.
Yeah, James, tonight's guest WeatherBrain is a senior meteorologist investigator. I guess that's / investigator for the NTSB. He's been with the National Transportation Safety Board since January 2011, serving in the Office of Aviation Safety. He has served as a meteorologist investigator in more than 500 accidents, including Spaceship Two, Asiana Flight 214 in San Francisco, the Caribbean Airlines Flight 523 in Guyana, Southwest Flight 1919 in Chicago, and several hundred general aviation accidents in the United States around the world. He's got a BS in meteorology, MS in atmospheric science from North Carolina State University. That seems to be a trend lately. Paul Suffren, welcome back to WeatherBrains.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being back. And say hi. And I bug Neil a lot, so I'm looking forward to him bugging me back.
Well, you Wolfpack guys got to stick together, right? We definitely have had a lot of y'all lately. So one of my kids looked at me this week and said, "What do you think about going to one of the 3 colleges in the Research Triangle area?" And I was like, "That sounds really good. I bet I got some contacts at NC State we could talk to." So, but anyway, well, Paul, how long you've been doing NTSB since 2011, right?
Yeah.
How long you been in meteorology?
So I was with the National Weather Service for 4 years before that, up in Juneau, Alaska. And then when to move back to the East Coast. So at that point, got the job with NTSB, thankfully, and been there about 10 years. And then before that, fun NC State College. So,
well, very cool. So we mainly wanted to have you on tonight because a big study came out recently about turbulence. And of course, there are lots of cases of severe turbulence and some turbulence that sort of struck without warning. I know that's probably the wrong thing to say, but what would the term be for that sort of unannounced turbulence, Paul?
Well, I mean, it would be unexpected turbulence, whether it's unexpected by the pilot or the flight attendants or both. It depends on the cases and such.
Well, Paul, in a way, I mean, that's so you can protect yourself against that if in most cases, right? I mean, if you just, I tell my classes at UT, there's a very easy way to protect yourself if you're on that airplane, and that is to keep buckled your seatbelt, unless you're on the toilet. And I said there ought to be a seatbelt on that, but I mean, it's pretty easy to prevent in a lot of cases, right?
Absolutely. So we went back through about 10 years of our data before we aggregated and did more to the study for the past year. But we found that no passenger was seriously injured when they had their seatbelt on. Most of the injuries come from flight attendants, unfortunately, as they're either getting back to their jump seat or if it's unexpected somewhere in the aisle.
So what are some of the more prolific cases of unexpected turbulence and the tolls they took, Paul?
So when we go back through the 10 years of data that we did, definitely the what rises to be classified as an accident for the NTSB is a much higher threshold than pretty much all the commercial airlines like American, Delta, Southwest. It has to rise to a serious injury, which basically rises to the point of a broken bone. So that's an easy way to think about that. But most of those are convective cases, thunderstorm cases, whether they're flying very close to or into a thunderstorm cloud, or convective induced turbulence that's away from the thunderstorm, or MCS or something like that, but it's propagating gravity waves away from, and it still induces the turbulence.
Well, I've got a question for you, and this is kind of a strange one, but I just kind of wonder, when you look at those cases, is there anything geographic, as far as geographic locations, that are probably more favorable for that? I mean, the Pacific or the Atlantic, the Northern Pacific or Atlantic, or is there anything, or are they pretty equally distributed globally?
Well, it depends on the type of turbulence that we're looking at. For our length of our study, since the NTSB concentrates mainly on things domestic wise, we stuck to the CONUS and Alaska and looked at turbulence cases there. But if you're looking at mountain wave cases, they're of course going to be more prolific over the Mountain West, or some along the Appalachian Mountains, or convective cases are typically going to be Midwest, Florida. But they can arise anywhere, and it also depends on the time of year. As we learned from a few of the airlines and folks we went to, and the air traffic control centers that we went through the course of this study, folks in the airlines were took a wider berth from thunderstorm activity, especially early in the season, so March, April, May. But further on in the season, the air traffic control folks that we talked to, airlines were getting a little bit closer to the convection by August, September, and things like that.
If you have one more question, then I promise I'm going to shut up for a second. Maybe not.
Please don't.
But question, if you have an American, Delta, United, that is traveling transatlantic or transpacific, Paul, and there are injuries or an incident on that plane, even though it's not domestic, would the NTSB pick that up?
Yeah, so the NTSB has at least one person looking on it if it's an American person, a part, or a plane anywhere in the world. So for example, if an accident happens with a Boeing 737 that lands in India, then we'll at least have one person looking at that case. But India has their own NTSB, like folks that will lead the investigation, and since Boeing is an American company, we'll have what's called an accredited representative. And so we'll kind of be a gatekeeper for the information they're in.
And territories as well. I know the 747 crash at Guam, which I've been out to that crash site, and that would be covered by y'all as well, right?
Yeah, U.S. territories and things like that. Absolutely. So, yeah.
So clear air turbulence, Paul, is a term that I've always been familiar with, but is that still a term today? And is it, I guess it's not the same thing as unexpected turbulence, but classify that for us, and what sort of weather features generally present a threat for that?
So over the course of the study, convective cases were about 60% of the accidents that we had, but clear air turbulence was anywhere from about 25 to 30%. And so that could be anything from jet stream related turbulence, at altitude, things a little bit closer down as they're on approach or things like that. Low level wind shear would sometimes fall into that category and such, but it's something that's not directly associated with a mountain, and it's not something directly associated with convection. So that would fall into the clear air turbulence, but any one of those categories could be unexpected. It just depends on the communication. And that's what a lot of times that we see, not only in our Part 121 or commercial carrier, but also general aviation accidents, that sometimes there's a breakdown of communication between various and sundry industries in the process.
Have we ever had a plane crash of a commercial jetliner or airliner in the history of aviation related to turbulence?
So you're testing my weather history knowledge here, and I know one of my coworkers.
Well, we've been compared to congressional
Yeah.
investigations, so
I
this
know.
is a good thing, Paul.
So I know that the last fatality, I believe, was due to turbulence, was actually a flight over Japan or near Japan about 20 to 30 years ago. And that was the last major fatality. But as far as bringing a commercial aerodynamic line specifically due to turbulence, I'd have to go back. I know planes have lost an engine and had to come and land at the airport, but have made it successfully back. But obviously very scary when you lose a whole engine and off the empennage and things like that. So.
Yeah, I see the date you're talking about, December 28th, 1997, a United Airlines 747 from Tokyo to Honolulu, where the one passenger was killed, 63 injured. That's a lot of injuries in that case.
Yeah, and we find that over the 10-year, for us, for Part 121, a commercial carrier, classified as an accident, it's about 35 to 40% of our commercial accidents are turbulence related, where one or more persons are getting a serious injury. So thankfully, over the past 20 to 25 years, the accident rate for commercial airlines has gone down quite a bit. But we're still seeing a pretty steady line as far as statistics for serious injuries due to turbulence.
Oh, it's Aubrey here. I got a question for you. Did I hear you right? And you say that an engine fell off because of turbulence?
Yeah, there was a case in Colorado that I actually a coworker of mine from my master's work did a little bit of work for that particular case. But yeah, they were taking off from Denver and going over the Front Range and lost an engine and were able to come back around and thankfully land safely.
How rare is that for the aircraft to actually sustain like an injury from turbulence? Obviously it's going to be, more so, like you said, flight attendants and the passengers inside, but how often is that aircraft actually damaged?
So what would classify as an accident for us would be what's called substantial damage. And we have an expert in that, and I'm not privy to or not knowledgeable in all of that, but things like you've seen pictures, I'm sure, over the last 3 or 4 years of a whole radome imploded by hail or something like that. That is not substantial damage to the airplane. But losing a gear or other types of damage to the airframe can be substantial damage and things like that. But there hasn't been anything in quite a while as far as substantial damage to the airplane that has risen to the level of an accident as we would classify it.
Well, it's good to see you again, Paul. I've got a bunch of questions and thoughts. I don't know that I've told people here that I used to work in avionics in the aircraft industry and studied icing and turbulence for a long time. So the company I was with would get pulled in to provide data for a lot of these investigations, going as far back. I think maybe the Colgan incident might have been the first one, but a lot of those were icing related. It's wild to me. I actually was on a flight once that was I would say maybe moderate. It wasn't anything like you would get flying into a hurricane, but the person next to me, I had my computer open, and I actually at one point on another flight had Larry Corman's PowerPoint open with his opening slide for that plane that was missing an engine on the ground. And anytime you're working on a PowerPoint with that slide and people look over, they start asking questions. But the person next to me, it was pretty bumpy. And like, what do you do for a living? I said, I study aviation weather stuff and
planes that fall apart. Yeah.
Like when you get nervous, then I'm going to freak out. And I said, this is pretty amazing. My neighbor used to work at Boeing, and he showed me some of these stress tests that they do on the wings, and they can literally bend them to like a 90-degree angle before they'll snap. So in a lot of your experience when you're looking at these incidents, like how much is turbulence, how much is icing, like from an aviation perspective, what are the actual real concerns? Because it seems like the public is extremely freaked out about turbulence, but the pilots clearly aren't, especially the ones that have been flying for 30 years. Everything is light turbulence, no matter how much you're getting beat around. So what's sort of the professional view on what's really scary when it comes to aviation weather?
So, I mean, I think it would depend on oh, is your hand feeling better, by the way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not able to cast my fly rod yet. That's my metric of success. That's probably a week or two away still, but thanks for asking. Yeah, it's getting better.
Okay. Yeah, so the type of weather would probably depend on what type of flying that the folks are doing. So if it's Part 121 or commercial carriers and things like that, it's definitely extremely safe. But turbulence is definitely our biggest rises to an accident. When we're talking about Part 135, which is more of your for hire folks, or Part 91, which is general aviation, mom and pop, just flying out of a local airport, there can be pretty much any kind of weather. But Part 91, general aviation, typically it's VFR into IMC, or visual flight rules into instrument meteorological conditions. And what that means is pilots are used to flying clear of clouds and not any weather at all, and all of a sudden they get caught into a cloud, and unfortunately they can get spatially disoriented, or lots of times we'll see in our accidents there's a combination of things on the general aviation side. They get spatially disoriented and then they start to ice up as well or something.
When I sort of got out of that field, this was right when smartphone apps were well, first of all, it's right when they were letting you actually leave your phone on, but you have to turn it into airplane mode. And then there was some of these apps that were developed, and they started putting accelerometers in smartphones. Is anyone looking at the accelerometer data from smartphones now? Is that considered even a reasonable source of information?
So for accident data, I know that we've used that before, but for turbulence related, there is one particular company that's actually using iPads and the accelerometers on the iPads, and they've given that to a number of pilots, not just domestic, but also international, to kind of test bed the idea of how realistic that is turbulence wise related to other data sets that they have. And so far, as long as they quality control it seems to have pretty good accuracy.
That's pretty cool. I guess you could compare that with the instruments on the plane and see if it lines up.
Yeah, for commercial airlines that do have eddy dissipation rate or EDR equipment on board, they can compare the iPad to that and see how it scales, and then from there kind of work through a data assimilation set and such.
That EDR is going to be my next question. So I've always been curious about because that's sort of an objective measure of turbulence. How do you or let me rephrase that. Do you run into issues trying to convert accelerometer data to EDR data with all the different weight load balance issues and fuel burn across the flight?
So that's actually one of the recommendations at the Ntsb that came out of this study. Was there's about 3 or 4 different kinds of EDR that are used by several different groups, and they don't always necessarily correlate with one another in different cases. And some airlines have put a lot of money towards such and such EDR, and a lot of other industries have put sort of EDR number 2. And so one of our recommendations was for the FAA to work on a way to make sure that if a scientist or any airline is going back and using this data, that they make sure they can go from EDR 1 to EDR 2 and understand how that can calibrate so that everybody can use the data safely, and then in turn make better weather forecast products.
So I guess this is technically a form of turbulence. So we've talked about mountain wave turbulence, clear turbulence. What about wake vortices? Is that a concern? I mean, I know it's a concern in areas like Dubai and Abu Dhabi that have like really stable boundary layers, but what about in the US? Are are there airports around here that have situations in combination with tight flight spacing where wake vortices are going to be an issue?
So there have been some turbulence related accidents related to wake vortices. And over our 10-year period that we went back through our data set, that was about 3%, or roughly about 3 or 4 of the cases. But we didn't look at that for this particular study. We stuck with atmospheric turbulence as far as the overall study that we've been working on about 2 years now.
So I'm curious, your conversation about turbulence, I think is a really interesting one. And like you said, turbulence really does scare a lot of passengers very much, but you also highlighted how it's not the source of greatest danger when you're flying. Taking aviation meteorology was one of my favorite classes in undergrad, but also one of the most terrifying, because all you do in classes with pilots is study disasters with planes, and in an attempt to make the pilots learn how to not do those things again. My professor's favorite saying was, takeoffs are optional, but landings are mandatory. So I'm wondering if you can, both you and Neil have a lot of experience in this world. Can you comment on, if turbulence isn't the thing to worry about, when you are flying, is there a moment that is worth being concerned about? What do you look out for? What are some of the points where aviation can be its most dangerous, especially for commercial airliners?
So I think probably for commercial airliners, it's going to be, some kind of communication breakdown or things like that. But it's going to be a host of different areas outside of turbulence. But it's extremely safe as far as, primary backup and secondary backup and things like that. And a lot of the pilots have a ton of training in those areas to be able to use the various different backups that they have. So we just looked at turbulence in this case. So that's mainly what I can speak towards, unfortunately. But if we're going towards general aviation, I have quite a bit more experience there as far as what that can be. And it's typically controlled flight into terrain or loss of control. And that can either be weather related, or that can be related to an engine failure or many other things.
Neil, did you get involved in aviation disaster stuff when you were working with icing? Because I understand that icing can be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I worked a lot on the Colgan incident. That one was some pretty low altitude icing. And I guess it was basically like one of those things where the plane ices up and it loses its speed. And when you're that low to the ground, a lot of times it's what you're supposed to do is point the nose down to gain speed to get lift. And it's very counterintuitive. People want to pull up and try to override all the systems. But yeah, it's really seemed to be, I would say 9 out of 10 things I got called in for were icing related, or it was like a GA incident where they were in low vis conditions, low ceiling or something like that. But that to me, icing seemed to be, as far as weather related stuff. I mean, I think what Paul's saying is spot on. For an incident to actually happen, there's got to be like multiple different things go wrong at the same time. It's got to be a combination of stuff, because there's so much redundancy in the entire system. Most of the pilots I've talked to are never concerned about anything related to weather. It's usually the big concerns are most likely, miscommunication, bad communication, and then maybe like a fire on board or something like that.
So James Spann, do you remember Southern Airways Flight 242? Do you remember that crash?
April 4th, 1977.
Yep.
Yes.
That flight has always haunted me, because it seems improbable now that any pilot would take off and fly through those conditions. Paul, I'm sure you're familiar with that. Hail ingestion, other things caused that plane to come down outside Cartersville, Georgia, on the same day that we were going through an F5 tornado in Birmingham at literally the exact same time. And it just seems like we're a lot better now at avoiding those type conditions. It seems like, at least.
Yeah, no, I mean, from that accident came one of the recommendations that the NTSB had was for the Center Weather Service units or National Weather Service meteorologists to go into the air traffic control and provide, support, not only, with briefings but they can be side by side with the controllers, and they've provided innumerable help to air traffic controllers as far as situational awareness of weather, because what an air traffic controller, all they can see on their scope is precipitation. They have no idea whether it's a thunderstorm, stratiform, icing, anything in there, but a CWSU meteorologist can come alongside if folks are stuck on top and provide weather support. And since that's been, thankfully, a lot of the accident rate has decreased since then.
Paul,
Paul, to talk about Delta 191 in Dallas Fort Worth. We're talking about these historic events. I was in Dallas that night on television when it happened, but how did that change everything in August of '85?
Yeah, so one of the recommendations that came from that was the terminal Doppler weather radar, TDWRs, and most of the larger airports around the country that are going to deal with wind shear are going to have a TDWR, and one of those is now in Dallas. And what that uses is a lot of work done by the academic community as well, and that goes directly to the air traffic control in the tower or in the TRACON, which is basically covering after takeoff to about 15,000 feet. And they can provide warnings right away to aircrafts that are on final or aircraft that are about to take off to let them know that wind shear is in the vicinity, a gust front is in the vicinity of an airport, and they'll go around and hold and things like that. So that has been very beneficial, coming from that accident has saved a lot.
Paul, the accident, Southern 242, correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, get in here as well. Prior to that, largely weren't the cockpit radars and I think the FAA radars, weren't they largely monochrome up till that point too?
I do not know the answer to that. Maybe Neil does, but there's been a lot of improvements with the weather radar on the nose.
But I know Paul, in the case of Southern 242, that was one where the storm was actually, the plane rather was actually steered into the hail core because the radar had rebounded essentially, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah. So on either side, you got radar attenuation, and the radar was on the left side and the right side of the beam was coming back a whole lot stronger. So it looked like a hole.
Yeah.
And so there are some older airframes that do still have weather radars that pilots still have to control manually, but a lot of the newer Honeywell, and I'm going to forget the other vendor out there, they do automatic tilting and things like that. And pilots in the cockpit are now allowed to use their electronic flight bags, and they're able to see exactly what the dispatcher is seeing on the ground. And so they have the same picture when they're communicating back and forth. And so that allows people to avoid what looks like a hole, and now they'll take the long way around.
Well, the question I was going to bring up, Bill, is what investigations in history really probably have affected weather forecasting more than others. And I certainly would think Southern 242, I think the Delta Flight 191, but you think sometimes we think we pretty much got in all the work that Dr. Fujita did and all the research he did. But then we ended up in the early 2000s with the American MD-88 crash in Little Rock, I think, that was wind shear related as well.
Yeah, my colleague, Don Ike, worked the weather on that particular one, flying into a thunderstorm there. And so we're still, the accident rate, thankfully, is continuing to decrease in the commercial world. But there still, unfortunately, are times where there's either miscommunication, or things like that. And so that's where we can come alongside and help prevent. If we can even prevent one accident from happening, then that's definitely worth it.
I think the one thing that I like to point out, and this goes back to Kim saying this a few minutes ago, if you want to get killed these days, I've got an expressway or 2 or 3 or 4 in Austin that'll get you killed. You're not going to be killed on an airplane generally. I mean, cars, you get run over in a second on these roads in Austin, Texas. And I tell students, as much as we talk about all this and the things that are involved, it's really a very safe mode of transportation. You want to get killed, get in the car. That'll do it.
Yeah, no, commercial flying is definitely one of the safest forms of transportation, even if it may feel a little bit bumpy at times because they're flying through a little light or moderate turbulence. I've noticed at times myself, even though I work at the NTSB and my master's work was in turbulence as well, that I still get, I'll be honest, I still get nervous flying. But for our job for the NTSB, we can ride jump seats still if we're going to accident sites and be able to do that. And I've noticed that when I'm in the cockpit flying with the pilots there, there's some measure of being able to see out the front, and I feel like I have a little bit of control, even though I have no control. I'm not touching anything. When I have that, I am never get nervous flying or anything like that. And so I'm sure there's some psychological things in there as well, as far as feeling unsafe when flying, but it's absolutely very, very safe.
I'll just interject a really quick comment on that. That is absolutely the risk psychology of it. There's a really strong framework that we use to understand how people perceive risk from things like flying versus driving. And you're right, Troy, driving is so much riskier, but we feel so much better about it because of an attribute the risk possesses, which is called controllability, at least the perceived controllability of the outcome. And so, Paul, what you're talking about being in the cockpit, you're actually feeling that a little bit more of that sense of control, in part because, you have a better view. You're not as constrained as the people in the back, but you're also closer to where all of the decisions are being made. And there's a little bit of that sense of controllability that comes with that. So just wanted to interject that quick comment that you're right. That has everything to do with it. We can't all sit in the cockpit with the pilot. We have to trust them. But it does make flying pretty tough.
I'm always fascinated, Paul, by listening to the air traffic controller. Since I was a child, I've enjoyed listening to that, and I have a little app on my phone when I'm sitting in the airport getting ready to take off that, I can listen. And we were trying to get out of Dallas the other night, and it was, big storms were coming in to beat the band. And I heard the controllers telling the incoming pilots or the pilots that were taking off, that there was 30 knots of shear, but they were still taking off and landing. And that seemed kind of surprising to me, because I've heard other cases where I thought 30 knots might have contributed to the demise of an airplane. Talk about that for a minute, how far we've come with just that part of the equation.
Yeah, so it all depends on the airplane as well, and what the airframe is allowed to do. It depends on what runway they're using as well when they're taking off or landing, as far as what things will affect there as well. But it definitely come quite a long way as far as being able to. A lot of air traffic is very strategic. You may think it's very tactical, when they're landing and taking off and things like that. But behind the scenes, there are air traffic managers that are rerouting maybe 30 or 40 flights to come into the airport this particular way, because that's going to be safer, not only when they're trying to land, but also on approach, or they'll hold them out there for 20 or 30 minutes or things like that there as well.
Well, we sat on the ground at National a couple of weeks ago for 4 hours when it was perfectly clear to the northwest. The storms were all east and southeast of the airport, but we could not get a clearance out of there to save our lives. And when we finally did, I was grateful. But, should we have, when I saw the storms, left of the airplane as we finally got to take off, it was like, boy, those were putting out some lightning. So, they were powerful. But is there any future that speeds this process up? Any changes in software coming? Anything that makes that process easier for the managers and the controllers and the pilots?
Absolutely. So that's part of the recommendations that came out of our study. One of those was to allow air traffic controllers not only to be able to see weather, but also to overlay lightning on their scope, overlay the weather forecast products on their scope as well. Right now, they have to turn their attention as part of their scan, and they're looking around the room to maybe look at those screens, and they can't see a direct overlay. So one of our recommendations, is definitely not to clutter up the screen, but have an option on there that if they want to toggle, they can turn on lightning, because we have had cases where lightning showed up before the serious injury, and the flight still went through that either building cumulus cloud or cumulonimbus cloud or things like that as well. One of the other things that we recommended as well was a lot of the new equipment that's coming out. So a lot of the airplanes and airlines out there have EDR on board. But unfortunately, a lot of that data is not being shared within the community or within the National Weather Service. And so as far as forecast improvements and being able to also do strategic or tactical use, not everybody's availed to that turbulence information or that icing information. And then one final thing that we recommended as well was related to the newest avionics that are going to be approved by the international community. And one of the things that sounds like is going to be on that equipment is weather. And it's called ADSB, or I'm going to mess up the acronym for that, so I won't try and say it. But on that will be a weather component, and that will be freely shared with everybody. So we're one of our recommendations is for that to be freely shared through the FAA and through the international community as well. So once all this sharing of information is being able to be done, it'll be able to be used by researchers, by the National Weather Service, by the private community to provide all the support that they need there as well. But we believe that all this turbulence report information is safety information. We had one piece of information. Somebody did a study listening like you to the air traffic control audio, and they used automation over the course of, I believe, 2018 for a large air traffic control route. And they found about 10 million times that weather information was shared, but only about 900,000 PIREPs came from that. So it's only 10%. So you're leaving 90% of the weather information that would be valuable to the weather community, to other pilots and things like that. You're leaving that on the floor. And so ways we can make that easier through automation or through an easy button and things like that is what we want to do.
I know you know the cause of every commercial aviation crash in the United States in the last 75 years. So Paul, if we get out of line here, just tell us. But Troy mentioned that Little Rock crash, and I flew into Little Rock just a few days after that, and was particularly touched by that situation. But it seemed like there were some human decisions in that too, or lack of decisions. Maybe they should have aborted that takeoff, or because they were up against crew time issues and other things. Anything else stand out from that crash to you that made it such a tragedy?
I think you've hit on a lot of the components that came from that one. And one of the things that I'm thankful here to work at the Ntsb is that while I may be in meteorology, I work with, in my division, our other air traffic control investigators, operations, or former pilots. We have a whole human performance division that are going in and checking out sleep cycles and talking to, every single different human decision component that could be in there to find the holes of Swiss cheese and try and plug those up with safety components in that.
Paul, we've been talking primarily about air carrier incidents and so forth, but what concern, because I know there is in the NTSB for general aviation and thunderstorms. I know that's a big thing. General aviation, the Cessnas of the world, small planes. I assume that's a pretty big issue.
So it's not our biggest accident rate. So visual flight rules in the extreme meteorological conditions is, but we did have a number of accidents speaking to exactly what you're talking about. And the NTSB issued a safety alert. And a lot of what we were discovering with that from the human performance side and the meteorology side and air traffic was a lot of pilots were using electronic flight bags, so iPads, all those things, and they were using weather radar on there. And not only is there a delay, but and a lot of pilots understand that, but there is a timestamp on the EFB that you're seeing. It may say 9:15 on there. Well, that's when they uploaded that component to your glass windscreen or things like that. And there's a further delay in there that a lot of pilots weren't necessarily paying attention to. And so we had a series of accidents, a helicopter one in Tennessee, general aviation one in Texas, fortunately a non-fatal one in South Carolina. And the pilot was able to talk to us, and it was extremely helpful in that case and connecting a lot of these dots together.
So you mentioned PIREPs. One of the things that I've always found interested in this goes back to trying to verify the graphical turbulence guidance and a lot of the algorithms that produce the forecast. The pilots tend to only report when there's turbulence, or even when it's like moderate or severe turbulence. You don't really see a lot of manual pilot reports where it's not like the pilot's getting on the radio saying, hey, there's no turbulence here. But that's actually useful information. Do you think that some of these automated reporting systems are going to be able to report a lot of where the turbulence is not just for flights that are trailing, but maybe they're way far back, but also for model verification purposes?
100%. I think that's going to do a boon to help the aviation industry be much safer, and for pilots and air traffic controllers and other meteorologists to use guidance more correctly and understand it better. If you're not crying wolf, I mean, right now, unfortunately, one of the turbulence forecasts out there can be extremely large. They can be sizes of states. Well, if the whole area is not seeing turbulence, you're going to be crying wolf for a portion of that. And so where turbulence is not, you can knock down those areas as far as where the turbulence is not, and further, make things safer, open other corridors that could help out pilots and other flights.
So I've before I ask a kind of a more serious question, I did want to mention we overlapped at NC State for a number of years. Did you take Aria's turbulence class?
I did not take Aria's turbulence class. No, I took his micrometeorology class, but not his turbulence class.
They recruited me to take that class because I think they needed a number of people to take it that semester, and I didn't have the prerequisites, and they told me, don't worry about it, you'll be fine. And I was so lucky. And one day he writes this equation on the board, and then below it, he's like, and you can see from that equation that we could obtain this. And I couldn't. So I raised my hand. I said, I can't. Can you explain this to me? And it literally took him 18 boards later. I kind of felt vindicated, although the other people in the class were looking at me like I'm just slowing the lecture down.
No, I remember that it was my first class in fluid dynamics, and the professor in grad school, he came in and he started writing equations and talking on the board. And then, we finished the class and he had no notes with him. And then, he came in for the next class 2 days later and started off right exactly where he was, in fluid dynamics. I'm like, how in the world does he do this? I'm scribbling with my hand as fast as possible. So yes, I can fit right in with your story.
So a little bit more serious question here. One of the things that I encountered when I was at NOAA and worked a lot with the people that were doing these site investigations after storm damage during the assessment and things, where that they encountered a lot of traumatic things that they would see and experience. Stories that just sort of blew my mind. And I was curious, when you're doing a lot of these accident investigations, how much of a lot of the pictures and imageries, or even in person on site, do you do, and do you feel like are you getting like trained to like deal with these types of things, like first responders would go through special training to like recognize when they're sort of experiencing something that's troubling?
Yeah, so the NTSB does have a support network that they provide to all employees that go through that. Fortunately, on the meteorology side, I'm typically not going to the accident site. If I'm going to follow up with an accident or go out there, I'm going to be going to where they made the forecast or the companies and things like that. But yes, I do occasionally see things like that. And the way I found to do it for the moment is compartmentalize. I have a job to do, and I want to do that to the best of my ability. And if I can just save one person's life by helping out either by advocacy or by doing a recommendation, then that's worth it. Because yes, we have to follow up with loved ones and things like that afterwards to find information. And we have a great support network. Our transportation disaster assistance folks, TDA, do a lot of that work, and they have training exactly in what you're talking about, the first responder type of stuff. And they're doing a lot of the next of kin follow up and things there as well.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. The work that you do is so important, and I know that all of us have benefited from the work of the NTSB. So I know it has to be so hard, but thank you for doing that. I want to ask a really quick question to kind of follow up on the conversation that you all were having about PIREPs. And Neil asked the question I was going to ask in part. I was really interested in this idea about having some automated systems that could sort of detect turbulence. And if you've been able to test those, one of the things that had been mentioned early in this conversation was that pilots, they're human, and maybe early in their career, they feel something could be quite severe turbulence, that later in their career, they're very seasoned, they don't see anything as severe turbulence. Have you done any quality controlling of PIREPs for things like tenure of a pilot to understand, now that you have this sort of technology available to objectively determine turbulence intensity? Do you know if there's an ability to do that, to sort of clean that data?
So anecdotally, I have heard exactly what you're saying as far as folks having, more seasoned pilots and things like that, or you can be differences between pilots that are flying cargo as opposed to flying passengers. You may see a difference, and that's just anecdotally. But one of the recommendations that we did as far as the turbulence report that just came out was doing different accelerometers within the cabin, because a lot of times in a lot of our turbulence reports, the pilot would say they had light turbulence and the flight attendants would say they had moderate or extreme, and they were hitting their heads, or broke a bone. And to the flight attendant, it was much, much worse. And so is that just because of the airframe and how it's responding, or is it just because there's two human beings and are categorizing that as different based on seasonality? So one of the recommendations that we did there was to find some objective truth depending on where you are in the airframe. Because one of the airlines or two of the airlines that we spoke to, there's a particular type of airframe that towards the back, they've actually adjusted a few of the way the seat is, the jump seat is for the flight attendants. And they've actually put, some padding up there, because they found this one particular airframe, the flight attendants were either back there, but it was still quite jolty in the back. And the pilots were still thinking it was not as bad turbulence as they were feeling and such. So.
Paul, question for you. You and I've talked offline on email about a couple of things, and I want to kind of get a feel tonight about some of the suggestions y'all make as a result of the investigations and so forth. And I think these are more or less called the NTSB, sort of the wish list sort of things for FAA to look at and things like that, and would like to get some kind of follow-up maybe on that. But I'm kind of interested, Paul, God forbid anything happened tonight, but if there were an air carrier accident tonight, what would be the process for activating the GO team in the NTSB?
Absolutely. So we have basically 4 different regions. It's split up a lot like the National Weather Service as far as Alaska, Western, Central, Eastern, and then we have the commercial carrier folks are all based out of DC. And so if an accident happens, we have a response operations center, which is basically monitoring a bunch of TV, the FAA pages that come out, depending on all throughout the United States. And once they either get notified or, folks in one of the regions get notified, it gets upscaled to it depends on, what type of accident it is. If it's a general aviation, then there's one person in the region that is on call, and they will get their go bag ready. They'll start to work on the logistics to get that up there on scene. If I'm on call meteorology wise, and we have somebody who's on call air traffic and operations, if it looks like an air traffic and weather related issue that caused that accident, then we'll also get we'll of course be looking at those things initially, but then if there's nothing, we'll kind of stand down and provide them preliminary information. But if there is something, we'll get our bag ready and then head out to those facilities. And so it basically scales up or scales down from there. So for example, in Asiana, which crashed in San Francisco, we sent, I believe, somewhere between 30 and 35 folks out there. And if it's the NTSB has 5. At this point, we have 4, but they have 5 presidentially appointed board members, and they will go and be kind of the voice for the NTSB at the accident side and be that communication channel out to the media as well as the families and such. And then there'll be IT persons. There'll be somebody who will come there and get the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, and then take those back to our labs at the NTSB headquarters in Washington, D.C. to download those. Any other kinds of electronic equipment that we can get our hands on. Our electronic lab folks are just amazing. They're able to, stuff that could be partially burned and things like that, they're still able to harvest a chip on there and be able to get us some data out of it. It's been extremely valuable, but it depends on the level of the accident and then who activates from there. But we have not only in aviation, but in marine and highway and rail, we have, folks that are on Go Team 24/7, 365. So fortunately I'm off Go Team right now, but I go on Go Team on my birthday next Monday.
So what, if you have never done this, for our listeners and the people that watch us, folks, please go to the NTSB, the publication site, the report site, and I will tell you some of the most informative PDFs on air carrier accidents. I still have the Southern 242, the Delta 191 somewhere on that shelf back there. They're just very interesting. And I found them from the meteorology standpoint and everything that's covered in those reports. Just really give y'all kudos, because it's really amazing what those reports have in them, Paul.
Yeah, no, I'm thankful to be working with the group there, because I feel like every single accident I'm learning something new that I can potentially help out another pilot or weather air traffic control interactions and help mitigate the holes of Swiss cheese lining up to potentially save one person, and that's worth it to us.
So one more thing real quick, that wish list. Is there an NTSB wish list sort of based off the reports?
Yeah, so for many of our larger reports, there is a recommendations that we send out, and depending on the accident, it could, aviation wise, it could be to the FAA, it could be to a carrier or an airline. If they have procedural problems and things like that need to be fixed, maybe the FAA has published something that's really, really good, but the airline has not brought that advisory circular or that information into their flow process or things like that to keep people safe. And so when we have an accident, there could be recommendations that come from that. And the objective is to make either the flying public or the pilots or the whole community much safer.
So
Here's, we have an air traffic problem now on the show here because nobody can decide whether they're going to go or not. So ATC says go Aubrey.
All right, Paul, just one last question. For the meteorologists, what do you think is maybe one of the most important case studies, if not everyone is a nerd that can pick out these dates like James, Bill, and Troy can? What do you think are maybe some of the most important aviation incidents that as meteorologists we should really look at, watch the case study, or look up a little bit further?
Honestly, I think the ones that they've picked out are some really seminal moments in aviation and weather combined history, and the technology that's been able to come from those has saved a lot of lives. So I think the Southern Airways, the Dallas one, there was one in Charlotte related to wind shear as well. Those have been some big seminal cases, even though they happened 20 to 30 years ago. A lot of technology that's still being used today and being updated today come from those cases. If you want to know about general aviation and things like that, it's a little bit a different area, but a lot of those I would focus more on things like improper use of electronic flight bags and how to, not just meteorologists, but pilots, and how we communicate that information is extremely important. And the folks at the FAA and the weather technology and the cockpit group have done an amazing job to try and figure out human factors of, if this button is red, is the pilot going to push it or turn it off? What is the human factors in there to as far as being able to do that? So I can definitely provide plenty of links on some of those.
And I think what's most impressive about the NTSB is, you see these terrible accidents, and you have smaller incidents, you have the larger incidents, but everything is a learning lesson. Everything is something you learn from, you take away, you implement changes, you really get into that detail for safety. And that's why we've had so many improvements over the last couple of decades, because if there's a silver lining out of a bad incident, it's that there's always improvements, and you guys are always working so hard to prevent that from happening again.
Yeah, that's the whole reason that we're here, to be able to do that and working hard. And our recommendations don't contain any emotion behind them. We'll get all the factual data, and then we'll write up the analysis. And that's just kind of what will fall out of the analysis phase is those sets of recommendations there. And we hope that either the industry or the FAA or others take action on those, because they would definitely potentially save many lives, at least once.
I'm sorry, Kim, but before we shift out of aviation, we had here in Birmingham an Airbus A300 that went down in 2013, very close to the Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport. And there was not weather involved in that. One of the causes was listed as pilot fatigue. And I just wanted to ask, how big of a problem is that?
So I know exactly the incident or accident that you're talking about. My colleague, Donald Ike, actually launched on that particular case. And there actually was a little weather relation to that one there too. A lot of the early portions of the electronic flight bags, as well as dispatchers, when they would send the METAR, it would strip out the remarks section. And on this particular day, the remarks section had variable ceiling below 1,000 feet while they're on the glide path. And that was not in the full remark, but it was in the full METAR, but that was in the remark section. And that did not get translated up to the cockpit in that case. But as far as fatigue overall, that is one of the things that we definitely look at in all accidents. We try and create a 72-hour history of what the pilots and co-pilots, as well as others, were doing beforehand, to see what sleep opportunities and things like that they've had. And unfortunately, on the commercial side, there's a lot of regulation in there to make sure that crews have the opportunity to rest before they're taking their next flight, and not being overworked and things like that, especially in the 121 community or commercial side. On the general aviation side, it's definitely crops up more. We also have things like get their itis. We have accidents where folks, were planning to take off at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, but they were late in work and didn't get to the airport till 7, and they don't go through all their checklist on the general aviation side, and unfortunately get in accidents there.
Okay. All right, Kim, you're cleared to go. Take off. Go. Runway WeatherBrains.
Thanks, James. I have so much sympathy for the people who are pilots. I mean, those lived experiences, they do have to have a certain amount of rest, especially if they work for major airlines. And now, especially since I've had children, I think about what must their lives be like. How can you possibly ensure that you have that much sleep? They just have to have very, very understanding and spouses who don't need a lot of sleep to cover for them. But those requirements are very important for all the reasons you just went through. So I'm really struck by the model of the NTSB. We're talking about all of the things that you do to deploy, and as has been discussed here, and Aubrey was highlighting, make sure that there are positive lessons learned after a catastrophe happens. I'm wondering if you can comment on broader disasters. If you were to envision there being a sort of NTSB for weather disasters generally, so not just involving an airplane. This is something that's been contemplated a little bit in our community, especially among an interdisciplinary set of social scientists and physical scientists after things like Hurricane Harvey, for example. The National Weather Service went out and did its own independent assessment of how its forecast performed and how users received that information, acted on it. And the Army Corps of Engineers did sort of their own assessment of how they managed floodways, levees, those kinds of pieces of infrastructure, and on and on and on. And every agency kind of does its own independent thing. making cross-cutting lessons learned is something that we are not very good at. And so we come away from these experiences, these catastrophes, feeling like, well, is this all on us? For example, in NOAA, our mission is to save lives and protect property. But in so many of these disasters, we actually rely on the kinds of policies FEMA has implemented that put people, perhaps, for example, with flooding, where they put people in harm's way or not. You know, they allow them to develop in places or not. You know, and on it goes. It's not just on us at the warning stage. We're sort of this last piece after a set of enormous set of societal decisions have been made to expose people to threat and build infrastructure to allow them to receive information about it or not. If you were to try to take what you do at NTSB and speak to these broader problems, do you think that could be done? And what might that look like in your view?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question there. I think that definitely can be done. And that's one of the things that I've appreciated about the NTSB is we have the party system, which is where we have experts that come into and work on the investigation side with us. So for example, if a Cessna goes down outside in you know, Kansas or something like that, if it's a fatal accident, we'll launch the NTSB to that. Somebody from Cessna will come along to see if there's any problem with the airframe. We'll have somebody from the engine manufacturer that will come along as well. That will be that expertise, because the person that launched may not be an expert in a Cessna 172, but they are in a 182 or something like that. And so we'll have those folks that come along there as well. And so that's been very beneficial to us. And I know that would work in the broader community. I think our independence has definitely helped out a lot as well. So we're not part of the Department of Transportation or the FAA. We're directly under Congress. And so that helps keep us the level of independence and transparency and things like that. Anytime that we're looking at another organization, they're exactly correct. There's a lot of stovepipe things either within the organization or within two organizations, and they're not talking to each other. And we find that in certain accidents, and being able to help bridge that communication gap is helping, but having that independence definitely helps. And so I think it would definitely work. You would just need to make sure that everyone is included on there. And if they're not, to at least have folks that are a party system like that. And so where you could bring in a policy expert at the local level, they may be a policy expert at the local level in the panhandle of Texas, but that would work really well for this town in Alabama where we're talking about this. And you have your weather expert, and you have the community and a government expert, you know, a politician potentially in there as well. And having all those experts in the same room, and that will cross-cut through those little stovepipe areas that can crop up in any organization. But I think that has helped us out a lot through our work.
So Paul, I'm going to move us over to away from airplanes. We're going to go to other things that you cover. You just wrapped up a report for a deadliest catch accident that occurred New Year's Eve of 2019. And I was reading a little bit about it. There was an article about it, and at least some members of two generations of boaters there that were killed. So talk about that and what it's like to work on different types of accidents.
Yeah, absolutely. So even though we're part of the aviation safety group, we provide weather support to our marine counterparts, our highway counterparts, and rail as well, and occasionally pipeline. So we'll look at the earthquake maps and see if there's anything related there for the pipeline folks. But yeah, I helped support the meteorology for a boat called the Scandias Rose that went down due to appears to be icing near Sutwick Island, which is a small island southwest of Kodiak. And they were going along, and there was a forecast for gale force wind, which is about 30 to 45, 50 miles an hour or so. And due to the channeling of the terrain from the northwest, it actually being close to hurricane force. And if you ever want to see a video, I think that's by an amazing crew that went out to save them, with the Coast Guard helicopter folks that went and took off from Kodiak to go save the two survivors from that particular boat. The testimony from the pilot, and that is one of the most amazing testimonies that I've heard. It's about 15 to 20 minutes long, but it's harrowing. The speed at which they were going, the turbulence that they were dealing with on the way out there, and all of a sudden the visibility went from half mile to 2 miles, and they were able to see the survivors and be able to pick them up, but they were able to hold the helicopter steady. One of the things that was absolutely fascinating from that case is they, as you've seen probably on any one of those shows with the Coast Guard, they send down the rescue swimmer and go down to check out the life rafts as well as pull the survivors up. They had to de-ice the rescue swimmer every time they brought him up because the icing was so bad with the hurricane force winds and the seas that were out there. But fortunately, they were able to get those 2 survivors in that case. But we issued a set of recommendations for that particular case, one of them being weather equipment in that area. It's known to have this type of issue, but there's not an abundance of weather equipment in that area to be able to support the mariners going out there. And one of the other things that we learned in that case is the regulation. And you guys have been asking me a lot of questions, and so I will pose a question to all of you. So what they did is they, as you've seen on Deadliest Catch, the crab pots will ice up and things like that. And a typical crab pot weighs anywhere from 800 to 600 to 800 pounds or whatever. And they calculate that in their stability report before the folks depart. And the Coast Guard did a non-scientific study that took a garden hose and sprayed water in there. Can anyone guess a fully, partially, mostly encased crab pot of ice, how much it weighed? It was not 600 to 800. Anyone venture a guess?
I haven't seen the show, but I have to say, I feel like I'm at the fair when they have this enormous jar of gumballs, and you know that even if you can measure the length and within gumballs, you will not get the volume. So I'm going to toss this to somebody else. I have no idea.
That's my alarm going off. Sorry, that's my 10 after alarm.
I've invited our next set of guests. So if they don't show up, we can just keep talking to Paul because this is fascinating stuff. So you say it weighed 600 to 800 pounds?
Yeah. Anyone want to guess? Yeah, without any on there.
Wow.
So the experts that we had for the particular study came in there and said it would be another 200 to 500 of ice weight on there. Wow. And it was actually greater than 3,000 pounds. It broke the scale. The Coast Guard didn't have the scale. So one of the recommendations we had from that case was for them to go back and do a study on that to see how much weight it's going to add so that mariners can be safer. Because right now the regulation only accounts for about 2/3 of an inch of an ice on side and about 1 inch on top, or 1 inch and a third. And the mariners we spoke to are not even going to go out there with the hammers until they have about 2 inches of ice because it doesn't break really well. And so things like that. So they're going to go back and do that study as far as that case.
Well, one last question from me, Paul, while we wait for the recorded segments and I mess up the production notes here. Recent Amtrak crash. I'm a big Amtrak fan. And in Montana, there was a big derailment. Anything you can share from that at this point, or is it just too early?
It's too early right now. I know we sent a GO team up there. I'm actually the meteorologist working that case. And so we're still at the factual gathering phase of that particular accident. And on the aviation side, I know quite a bit of us are why it takes the NTSB sometimes, 9 months to a year and a half to come out with accidents is we're working a lot of congruent cases at the time. And so, my workload may be 10 to 15 accidents. And so we got to line up particular phases where we can gather a bunch on these 3 cases and then go back to something else. And so I know for that Amtrak crash that they're working as hard as they can, but right now we're in the fact gathering phase still.
So do you have any information on why we've been having all these labor slowdowns in the aviation world? It seems like I've been caught by them on my last 2 trips.
That is out of my expertise. I'm not commenting on that one.
Yeah. See, now it's time to go to the recorded segments.
You're 3 minutes late, Span.
I blew the foghorn and y'all just kept on going. So let's hit Tony Rice and the astronomy report. We've got Jim this week in tornado history. We're going to come back with the email inbox, picks of the week, weather roundup, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
It's easy to take for granted the beautiful images we see of the Earth coming every few minutes from geosynchronous satellites like GOES East and GOES West. But the next time you're looking at one of those full color images of the continental US, don't just focus on the cloud cover. Notice the colors below. Notice the blues in the oceans, and the rich reds in the southwest, and the greens as they turn to orange. This begs the question, though, does Earth really look like that? The simple answer is kind of. The geocolor, or so-called true color images of Earth from the current iteration of GOES satellites, are based on data coming from the Advanced Baseline Imager, or ABI. The ABI sees the visible through infrared parts of the spectrum, 16 bands in all, and like players on a team, each has a very specific job to do, and they all work together. ABI bands 1 and 2 show things like aerosols and snows. They're also tuned pretty much to blue and red. We also have band 3, which is called the veggie band. It's very useful in detecting burn scars, making clouds stand out over water, and providing high contrast images along the coastlines. But this band is all the way up in the near infrared part of the spectrum, while primary green is quite a ways down in the visible part. So the one thing the ABI team can't do together is produce a true color image of the Earth because of that lack of a true green channel, but it can't come close. So how are those beautiful geocolor images created? Well, the truth is, they're very educated guesses of what would make the most sense to the human eye. NOAA created a lookup table based on data provided by the Japan Meteorological Agency's Advanced Himawari Imager, which is very similar to the ABI, but contains a truer green channel. My favorite way, though, is a remix of sorts. It takes a little bit of that red channel and combines a little bit of the blue and just a skosh of that veggie band and creates a pretty passable green image. There's a bit more to it, of course, with additional post-processing that takes into account things like Rayleigh scattering, but you get the idea. Right now, you can see leaves along the Appalachians up into New England turning from a rich green into a beautiful Chicago maroon and burnt orange. Elsewhere in the sky, look for Venus after sunset this week as it reaches the greatest separation from the sun on Friday. That means it'll be the easiest to see. Early risers can look for Mercury this week as well before sunrise as it reaches its highest point above the horizon this week, also making it easy to see. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, we look back at an estimated F4 tornado from October 25th, 1925. For Thomas Grzoulis, the tornado moved 65 miles through Crenshaw, Pike, Bullock, and Barber counties in Alabama. There was a total of 60 injuries along the path and 18 fatalities. Dozens of homes were destroyed in rural communities near the Crenshaw-Pike County line. At least 7 people died in that area, and this included 4 children and their aunt in one home and a 105-year-old woman in another. From the October 29th, 1925 edition of the Laverne Journal and the Crenshaw County News, the Baptist Church and schoolhouse were destroyed at Chapel Hill. In Plattsburgh, the school building was, quote, carried into the river swamp. The home of W.P. Spradley was demolished. Quote, at this place, a man by the name of Bradley, who was rushing to the home of Mr. Spradley to warn him of the coming cyclone, was severely wounded by a flying piece of glass from the Spradley building. The W.G. Hutchins farm near the Vernledge area sustained tremendous damage. 3 tenant houses were, quote, blown into splinters. Mr. Hutchins' home was also destroyed. Quote, 1 Ford car belonging to a tenant on the farm was blown sideways, turning over and over, carried out into the field, and finally crushed and ruined. This was an intriguing report that came out during this event. This is from the Tennessean in Nashville, Tennessee. Quote, near Laverne in Crenshaw County, an inspection of the cornfields revealed practically a total loss of the crop. Not only did the blast tear the ears down, but shelled the corn from the cob and left the ground literally strewn with the grain. We have a detailed summary about this event and hundreds more at tornadotalk.com.
Well, the torch has been passed. We have a new email officer. Are you ready, Jen?
Ready.
We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right, let's see what I can do here. I've got a few from the early parts of October. So we're going to start with our friend Rob Strecker. I was just watching a couple of YouTube videos, and I would love to see a show about on-air gaffes and bloopers. And I'm thinking we would need more than just one show for that one.
Yeah.
But, half of our normal shows.
That's exactly.
I don't think he meant us, but
yeah, just watch every week.
If it was about us, there's not enough episodes left in the rest of the program.
Exactly. James Lewis wrote, he's from Michigan, because there's been much recent discussion of the NOAA $1 billion disasters page. And my question is, how are events defined? and distinguished from each other for that page. Some are obvious, there's hurricanes and floods, but others are less so. The entire 2020 California wildfires are grouped as one event. The May 2019 tornado outbreak sequence seems to be counted as two. So I'm curious if any of you know how that is determined.
That's a Neil Jacobs question.
Agreed.
Yeah, so they actually look at insurance claims, and it's largely direct impacts. So my argument that I always used was, I think a number is way underestimated, because they do try to say, okay, they kind of understand, the actuaries kind of understand the ratio of insured to uninsured, so they can kind of extrapolate that. But then there's all these indirect downstream impacts, which I think actually drive the number way greater than these billion-dollar disasters.
Awesome. And we have one from Rod Woodward, and this is specifically for James, or Mr. Span, as he puts in the email here. He grew up in Oklahoma, and this is from about 11 days ago. He was watching coverage of tornadoes and noticed David Payne issue a Channel 9 tornado warning, I believe for a tornado near Clinton. Have you ever issued tornado warnings for ABC 3340 before the warning was officially issued by the National Weather Service? If not, I would be curious as to why not.
Well, I'm I'm not a big fan of television meteorologists issuing their own warnings. I think we should present a unified message that's consistent, whether you're watching channel A, B, C, or D. Now, we're going to communicate it differently. We're all different people. We're humans. We use different techniques in communicating that, and people will choose their favorite, but the message needs to be the same. And I do think we have the freedom from time to time to say, look, there's no formal warning here, but boy, this storm looks pretty dangerous. And if I were you, if I lived in here, I would go to a safe place. But I'm not going to say I'm issuing my own warning for this storm. So no, I think we need to be consistent in messaging.
Or anybody else have comments on that? I agree.
If you ever watched the La Plata tornado outbreak, I believe it was from the Weather Channel, a little series. They interviewed Topper Shutt, who is a meteorologist at USA 9 in DC. And during that outbreak in 2002, he noticed that rotation before the warning came out. And so they went ahead and cut into programming to go forth with a like tornado warning. I don't know the exact verbiage. I don't believe he was, we are issuing our own tornado warning. It was, I'm seeing something serious right now. This is why I'm on the air, and this is why I'm concerned. That's always one that kind of sticks out to me.
And that's the freedom that we need to have that little wiggle room. But again, the NWS chat, that's the crucial part of this. If a television meteorologist sees something, then by golly, get on there and throw it out there for all of us to see. That's my opinion.
The thing that's really tough to me about warnings is that, and this is stuff that we've revealed through our work trying to figure out, can we automate them with hazard probabilities if we were to get those to be really well calibrated? The thing is that warnings are a sort of human thing. There is subjective sense that there's something that the population needs to know about now. There's not a perfect cutoff point where all forecasters uniformly agree. Now this is risen to the level of a warning for all cases. And so it's in that light, it's kind of not surprising that you might get a broadcaster who's looking at the radar and sort of throwing up their hands sometimes saying, where's the warning? And what it means is there's a fundamental difference in opinion between the Weather Service forecaster and the broadcaster, not just about the likelihood. I'm sure that both would probably estimate it to be something middling, or, they hedge one way or the other on that, but that they're also thinking about impacts to the population in different ways. And so, I don't know, I see that conflict as a really interesting just byproduct of what a warning is and means. We forget that we're all humans in this equation, and risk is a very human thing.
I'm going to do one more email. This came in this evening from Owen Isaacs, and the World Series starts tomorrow, everybody, in Houston. Braves, Astros, who are we for?
Braves.
Braves here. Anybody got a pick?
They have a way of breaking my heart at this point. So
I know.
I'm a Red Sox guy, so I have no dog in the hunt anymore. But having said that, the story of Brian Snitker is just
I was going to say that
the
James.
Manager, that one of the greatest baseball books in the world is One Shot at Forever, about a small high school in Macon, Illinois. They had about 250 students. This was in 1971, tiny school. And back in those days, there were no 1A, 2A, 3A. Everybody played in the tournament. Doesn't matter how big or how small. The Macon High School baseball team made it to the state championship to take on Waukegan, which has 5,000 students in Chicago. And they got to the state championship, which in itself is unbelievable, but they lost. They lost that state championship. And Snitker played on that team, that little Macon High School team. And these guys wore cat hats, caterpillar hats. Their uniforms didn't match. They were coached by some guy with a Fu Manchu that really wasn't a baseball coach, a guy named Lynn Sweet. And they missed it. And for some of those guys, they never got over that loss. Yeah. In a small town, that's a big deal. But I think it's so cool that Snitker, at his age, has a chance at one shot forever, one more time. And this time, it's the World Series. So just for that story, I'll be pulling for the Braves.
Yeah, you got to go back and read Chris Ballard's article I guess it was in August, actually, but it kind of surfaced over the weekend. But he tells the entire story of Snitker's career, James. And this is a man who, toiled in the minor leagues, for, literally 40 years and was living in his daughter's basement in Atlanta when the call came for him to go and, be the, I forget which position coach for the Braves. And he jumped on it and, he loved it. And he got an interim shot at being manager. And then, he's basically been on 1-year contracts all of his life. And now, he's there. And it's just the best story that you'll ever read about if you love baseball, especially if you love the Braves, because, I had no idea about any of this. And so I may use it as my alternate pick tonight because I was so moved by the story.
That book is a great read. I have the audio version. I've listened to it several times, but it's just fantastic. And
do you remember what the coach said, James, at that little high school? He was the English teacher. And do you remember what the coach said? Lynn Sweet. When they ask on a questionnaire, when they register for the tournament or something, what is your team's weakness? Do you know what he responded?
No.
Coaching.
Yeah, probably. But there was a guy named Steve Schartzer on that team that never really got. Steve died last year, I think, but he coached at Huntington College in Montgomery and wound up somehow in Gulf Shores. But anyway, this is not going to turn into baseball brains. But
Snitker's
it's a great
son
story.
Is the hitting coach
for the Astros. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, it's a great read. But anyway, that would be a good alternate pick of the week is that book, One Shot at Forever by Chris Ballard. It's a great read. Cool. Sorry, Jen, we took it down the tubes.
No, that's okay. I made you go there. So I will wrap up my first ever email segment. And if you have any comments or questions or, you want to point out one of our gaffes, please email us at email@weatherbrains.com. And let us know what you're thinking. And we're going to be telling you what we think in a brand new newsletter. We're going to start that this week. We ran a campaign over the weekend, and a lot of folks have signed up already to get our new Brainy Bunch. If you've not seen the photo, you need to go to our homepage, weatherbrains.com, and check that out because you can still sign up to get our weekly newsletter. It's going to go out every Thursday. And it's going to have a recap of the show from Monday, a sneak peek at the show coming up, and featured guests as well. Some astronomy stuff, history stuff coming your way, and articles from the Brains, and whatever else we can throw in there for your fun and reading every week. We ran a contest this weekend for passes to go see the virtual premiere of the new tornado movie, 13 Minutes. And I was really hoping they were going to be on tonight, Bill. I'm not sure what happened, but we're going to go ahead and talk about the movie anyway. But we do have 2 winners. So WeatherBrains was able to receive 2 passes for 2 separate winners. And so I have the names of our winners, and you guys will be sent a link by representatives of the movie on Thursday. But we have Vicky Weinsmantel. Hope I said that right. Vicky and Patrick Allen. You guys won the passes to see this movie. And all I did is I ran a little random name picker, and I had one of my chipmunks be my witness. So that's how that ran. And we did that over Discord today. So let's talk a little bit about the movie. Did anybody get a chance to see it? Because I have seen it. I was able to do a preview. So if you're able to see it, I think we should talk about it a little bit and kind of give folks a preview. It officially is in US theaters on Friday. And then I think a few weeks into November, they will have it released where you can watch it virtually. So what do you think?
Would you like my one-line review?
I do.
Jim?
Yeah.
Destined to be a cult classic.
You think?
Well, it'll be right there with Sharknado and some of those other great films. I tell you what, after watching it, you will immediately go to the web and figure out where to buy a storm shelter from if you don't already have one, because the scenes of the tornado and the scenes of the destruction afterwards and are just harrowing.
If that's what it takes, I say amazing.
I
Absolutely.
do too. I'm
amazing.
putting my boots by my bed tonight just in case one comes out of nowhere overnight, because you look at that debris field that they created for this. They tore some stuff up for this movie, and James has always said it, and it's never hit home more to me than it did watching that movie. You got to have some hard sole shoes, or you're just in big trouble after that thing is over.
Yeah, the movie did a really more than most disaster films that sort of just follow some central character as they experience something and then they run off. It really lingered with the people who are decision makers, people who have to communicate risk to people. So it did the whole integrated warning team. There's a broadcast meteorologist involved, and their personal story, an emergency manager, and their whole AMA. You sort of see the behind the scenes on that, and then they linger with a number of different population segments that have to go through the event, the 13 minutes of lead time. They're sort of figuring out how to respond and going through that. And then afterwards, that aftermath piece. And I think for me, I probably, enjoyed is probably the wrong word, but I appreciated the aftermath piece the most of everything that the movie provided, because that's something that, in speaking with tornado survivors, they all sort of talked about how that's something that they weren't really ready for, including things as simple as those shoes. You really do need some when you go down into your shelter to face what you're going to face when you come out of it. And the movie did a really nice job, I thought, representing that there's still danger and risk and stuff you've got to do after the tornado passes. That's just the start of a process of still surviving what's gone on. And for that, the movie creators, I think that was part of what they were really trying to get out of it, was getting that deeper human story, and including broadcasters and meteorologists are also going through it. So, Span, when you watch this, you'll probably be able to relate, since you just went through something similar, having to be on air while your hometown, your neighborhood that you recognize with your family still there, they're in the path. And that's something that the movie kind of deals with a little bit.
Where was this set? What did they
in
say?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma.
If anybody can pronounce
what's
the
the deal
name.
here? Like every tornado movie is in Oklahoma. Haven't they read Gincini? Haven't they read Gincini's paper here? I mean, it's like it will never be set here. People in North Dakota, in California, in Seattle, and Boston think tornadoes only happen in Oklahoma, because every stinking movie about tornadoes is set in Oklahoma. What is this?
I'll say, I think, Alabama would have also worked. They chose a number of social issues to weave through the movie as well. But I think that those social issues would have been very similar.
Come on. We got the same issues here. We got the
Did
same
the tornado
issues
happen
here.
at night in Oklahoma, or was it
You
a
know-
daytime?
No, it's in the daytime.
Broad
Okay, so
daylight.
now we need a nighttime event in Alabama.
You're right.
There you
No,
go.
There needs to be a sequel.
that's not sexy. That will never make Hollywood.
One thing I never thought about, we always run people into coolers, like in, restaurants and convenience stores, and you hang out there. And I thought it was interesting because the lady said to the housekeeper, "Push your cart over here." And I'm like, "Where is this going?" And all of a sudden they start taking off towels to wrap up in, because it's cold in the freezer, and they all started out wet. And I never thought about that. You'll catch cold and die of pneumonia, Troy, if you survive the tornado.
Now, did they make the weather person in the movie look like Brick Tamlin? You know,
Yeah, a lot.
Mentally retarded.
Oh, no,
Every
not
Hollywood
that.
movie has
Oklahoma
the TV
meteorologist
weather
No,
guy.
based off
No,
of.
I wasn't impressed with that.
This was
I-
actually, so go ahead.
No, we may be saying something similar. I was not impressed with the TV meteorologists. And I don't know how much, I guess since they're not on the show, we can just say whatever we want to, but I want to be critical here.
That was their
I
first
thought-
mistake.
I thought they made him into a buffoon. That's my opinion.
They always
And I
do.
don't
They
think that was
always
like
make
that at
they
all.
always make TV people look like total stooges, buffoons.
James, do you think any TV station
imbeciles.
would have let their TV meteorologist play that role in the movie?
What?
Maybe not.
But I mean, why do you even write it this way? Why does the weather person on TV have to be an idiot? I don't understand that. That is a common universal theme in all these movies. I mean,
I watched the
Dad
trailer
gummit.
and I thought he was kind of annoying in just a minute and a half trailer.
Well, he's the emergency manager's husband. So, you know, there
I
was the
like-
tie
I mean, that's
there.
somewhat that
Good.
could be factual. That happens.
now don't tell me he's some blow dry Hollywood boob looking guy, a good looking guy, right? Is that the deal?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, he kind of
Yeah.
fit that. that
Yeah, he's a
description
good
there.
looking guy. And I mean, that's actually something I really wanted to ask them about. I had a lot of questions for them about some of the choices that they made in different social issues they represented and how they then factored that into how people would respond to the warning. That's one of the big pieces of this movie. But the broadcaster does some interesting things. And there's the most controversial thing in the movie might well be that there's a scene dealing with people sheltering under an overpass. And I'm going to give one thing away. No one appears to die who made that choice. And
Well, one got his hand stuck through the roof of a car.
well, and that's
That was-
yeah, he had a hand injury. There was a hand injury. I again don't want to give too much away, but the broadcast meteorologist does happen upon that scene. And the thing he says there, I watched with one of my close colleagues who we work in the test bed together, and she actually studies broadcasters and how they use, different kinds of technologies and things. And we were both trying to decode what this person felt about that situation and their responsibility, or if they had any responsibility over how that had unfolded. But I really am curious about their choice to let those people make it through that, some of them completely unscathed. Because this tornado, again, spoiler alert, this tornado is extremely devastating. I mean, the implication is that it's an EF5 tornado. And there were a lot of really realistic sort of portrayals they made of people actually surviving something like that. I thought that some of the stuff they did was really, really good, and showcased what those things are like. But that one, I have some questions about why they made that choice.
but
Do we know what the consulting process was?
The weather guy was out roaming around during all of this, like
Well,
driving in his car.
because he knew that the tornado hit his home where his daughter was. And so he, races out of the studio and leaves some sixth grader who was there on a school visit to be in charge of the weathercast for the remaining part of the
He
morning.
just leaves in the
He
middle of
just
the
leaves.
coverage.
Yeah, he just leaves and heads off, and he encounters this underpass situation, and just so happens that like the hospital, like the hotel and the overpass and the EMA are like within one block of each other or something, because they really cover some ground very quickly. But one of the best parts is that country singer Trace Atkins is one of the protagonists. And so when the tornado's coming, the wife and the son are imploring him not to leave because there's a tornado warning. And he says, "I know the difference between a tornado warning and a time-wasting tornado warning." And so off he left, and they had to go rescue him off his ATV and perform mouth-to-mouth on him. Well, I got to quit giving the movie away, Kim.
I know. Still.
Brother.
Right. But anyway, but it's Trace Atkins is worth the
We
the
recommend
watch
people to
myself.
go see this movie. I really
Yeah,
think
it's
people
gonna be
need to
fun.
see it. And we could all be critical. And I'm one of the biggest critics, and I have things that I would have liked to have seen more of the cleanup and the recovery at the end, because of the community. That's my heart for a community rallying. But there were some powerful moments, and I really think that it's impactful for people to see some of the damage field reminded me of not only Oklahoma damage, but it reminded me of what we had seen with super outbreak stuff as well. So I think that it's impactful, and there are lessons within it as well in the bigger grand scheme of things. If you're looking for Twister, this is not Twister. I was thinking action packed, when I first thought about it. It's not, it's a thoughtful drama. And so go in it with that, and be open-minded to what you're going to learn, and hopefully there'll be some powerful lessons for folks. And once it's out for a little while, maybe we can dig a little bit more. And I really like to get James's opinion after
We'll turn it into a drinking game. That's what we'll do. But I
Yeah.
thought the other thing that was great was, and this really hit home to me, the motel owner comes down with these cards to give the housekeeper on the morning of the tornado. And she picks it up and looks at it. And it's a difference between a watch and a warning. And I thought, that's exactly what we do. And I don't know that every
I'm so
hotel
curious
does it,
what
but
their
it-
research process was, because for Twister, they went to the severe storm lab, and they had a lot of consultants there. So I'm curious what their process was, their research process, and who they talked to.
yeah, that would
be
be
really,
interesting.
yeah, it would be really interesting to know. I know, so the person who is the executive producer for this has his own sort of investment company where he has started a number of different initiatives, and he's a storm chaser, and he also is very interested in philanthropy surrounding tornadoes and surviving tornadoes. So there are a number of projects that he's been involved in where I think they've understood, the sort of angle of surviving tornadoes, and the information system that feeds into people being enabled to do something like that. I have a feeling that a lot of that drew from those experiences and those
You
projects.
could
And
tell that.
so
Kim.
it might not have been a lot of domestic involvement. Because he's actually Canadian. He does a lot of stuff in the Northern Plains, some stuff domestically here, but yeah, I'd really love to still get their perspective on what the process was for selecting some of these stories, because one of the things that I think they were really trying to portray is that people bring their whole lives and whole selves into any disaster scenario. And while you might pick at some of the things that they chose to dramatize, a lot of it is ripped from headlines kind of stuff that some of these families are going through. While you might choose to pick at some of that, they represent things like non-native English speaking populations and some of the racial dynamics in, people who have power over those people, and, the kinds of options that they then have, and the ways that they can receive information or not, and the things that they might prioritize over the weather. And, all of that I thought was a fairly faithful representation of the kinds of challenges that one might expect to see in different populations. So I really do applaud them for making that attempt. Most movies really stick with, I hate to put it this way, but they stick with the pretty well off, just people who have no barriers to responding, and it's more the dramas are much simpler in nature. So that part was really great, and I would like to talk with them if they'd still be willing to talk with us after this. I still think it would be really great to talk with them about this movie.
No, we
So
definitely have to do that.
I have to ask, did they inject politics into this thing at all?
Oh, everywhere.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere. It's as strong as the debris field across the script.
Yes.
Is there any safe haven from politics these days? I mean,
No.
it's just like,
No.
I deal with these right wing and left wing loons every day, and I don't want to go to some theater and watch a movie where they're
Well, it's not preaching at you.
Preaching.
It just lays it out there.
oh, brother,
As Kim says, it's ripped from the headlines.
great.
Yeah. They take a lot of things that someone who studied how people respond to tornado information and make choices to respond, I'd never come across these particular situations as being as influential as they were in the movie, but as a way to dramatize and bring life stories into it, it was effective. But yeah, it's sort of laced with politics.
I thought the Mamatis on the backside of the storm was a great touch.
That was that was a really cool moment. I agree.
I guess I'll still watch it. I'll have an open mind, and
We'll be talking about it every year.
The weather person
Discovery
is a
Channel or whatever it is.
weather person is a buffoon, and it's got politics all through there. I mean, please.
That's the only message you got out of all this.
Yeah.
There were like 15 societal issues that Kim raised here, and you get that out of it.
Well, no,
Aubrey just said we need a stand cam while he watches it. That would be entertaining, actually.
Yes.
I'm going to wear duct tape so my head doesn't explode.
I think, James, your favorite part, again, I'm not going to give away too much of the plot here. Your favorite part will be what the broadcaster chooses to do right after he realizes that the tornado has hit his hometown. There's still a massive tornado outbreak going on in his DMA, but he makes a very particular choice that I want to see your facial expression when you see it. I would pay to see it.
So can we do like Mystery Theater or Science Theater 3000 or something on the anniversary every year?
Oh, brother. There's some guy in Nashville that's been after me for years to do one of these movies, and I ain't got time for that. I don't have time for any of this. I mean, it's like
there was your chance. You missed it.
So I'm just saying, maybe I need to go back to this guy and say, all right, let me go watch this, 12 days or whatever it is. And if it's really just
13 minutes. Close.
13 minutes, 12 days. It's all the
same. I appreciate that it's based on the average lead time of a tornado. That's nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's probably what's the name? I didn't even catch that. That's pretty smart.
But I thought that's what that was. I thought it was the lead time. Is that what that means?
That is what it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Well, all right. So we got to do weather roundup. Are we through here? Or do we need to build your
production notes say you're clear to go, Mr.
My production notes are like all out of whack here, so we're just gonna roll it.
The weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
We need a West Coast correspondent. To discuss what's happening on the West Coast. Do we have anybody from San Francisco that's been on the show? A meteorologist, Weather Service TV?
Just Jan Knoll. I think that's the only person. We've had him on several times. He's good, but we need to have someone else.
I know Drew too. He actually used to work in Virginia. He's out there in San Francisco.
But it's been a pretty rough ride with these deep storms out there. I mean, I'm trying to figure out who's closest to California here. It's got to be Troy or Kim, one of you two.
I know that Sacramento had a daily rainfall record yesterday. I think it was 4 inches, or the most ever recorded. I think the old record was an inch or so below that, but that was pretty significant. But there has been a lot of discussion on the MAP email group in regard to atmospheric rivers, which was really important. And also I think I saw Neil and maybe a couple of you that the pressure in that system off the West Coast, being a cold core frontal low, was one of the strongest we'd seen in a number of years out there, right?
Yeah, it got down to a 941, I think. Yeah. Which is just, it broke a record by, I think, probably 10 hectopascals.
Was it Sacramento that like set a record for consecutive days with no rain and then got 4 inches of rain in one day?
I don't know if it was that, but the sad thing is all the burn scars in areas that just absolutely, you can't burn all that off and then pour this amount of rainfall without everything just sliding off the hill. And particularly bad in that area, apparently north of San Francisco, the Bay Area itself.
We got to get Morgan Palmer back on the show sometime from
I was
Seattle.
just messaging him, James.
Yeah, we of course, he makes us all sound bad because his voice is so good, but I would love to have him back on the show sometime. But obviously that's happening out west.
Can I tell you, My brother
Yes.
texted me last night, James, and he said, hearing terms like bomb cyclone and atmospheric river on Sunday Night Football tonight. This is the only way I'll understand science.
Yeah, bingo. Show title. So on the East Coast, Aubrey, you're our East Coast correspondent. We got a pretty nasty nor'easter that's going to spin up over the upper Atlantic coast.
So we did pick up on a little bit of rain tonight, but most of the instability and that severe threat was kind of east of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was just looking up the storm reports because we did have a tornado warning down south near Martinsville, just kind of west of Danville. Earlier this evening, and it looks like more so a lot of some tree damage concentrated around Appomattox, some heavy rain around the DC area, looks like some flooding around DC. And then we did have a wind gust report, where was it? A mesonet, 64 miles an hour, just west of DC. It looks like around the Sterling area, which is where NWS is. So that's going to intensify tomorrow and really kick up the winds. Unfortunately, because the foliage is so delayed, we haven't hit peak across parts of the Blue Ridge and Skyline Drive. So now we've got some high winds coming through for tomorrow. So it's going to take down a good chunk of things where we should have had peak this past weekend. I would say by the end of this week, we'd be at peak. So it's kind of like, it's going to take down so many of them, but what's left is going to be pretty by this next weekend. But there's going to be a lot of leaves down.
Yeah. Hey, Neil, can we stick a fork in the hurricane season, or we got one or two left in the tank here?
The water's still pretty warm. This system that's sort of sitting off the Carolinas, actually, the Hurricane Center gave it a little bit of attention just a couple hours ago. I think it'll develop, but I don't know that you'd necessarily call it a warm core tropical system. But I mean, it's going to get pretty hard here in the next couple of weeks to get stuff spun up. But, off Africa, that water's still pretty hot.
Storm warnings on the Massachusetts coast.
Yeah, they've got a 50% chance of this thing acquiring subtropical or tropical characteristics. And I agree, it looks like a cold core kind of thing to me, but we'll see. But anyway, hurricane season runs on for another month here. And
this is like an anniversary of the perfect storm, isn't it?
I think it is
1991.
Yeah.
Weren't you in that one, Neil? Weren't you out in your boat in that storm?
I was actually down in Indy Atlantic, Florida, surfing some of the biggest waves that Central Florida has ever had. It was wild. It was a Halloween Day storm that we called it down there.
Wow. But where we are, we got this big upper low that's going to set up late this week. And we're going to have a day down here in the deep south. We're going to struggle to reach the middle 50s. It's going to feel like wintertime here for us. Troy, how's your heat situation? I do weather in McAllen, Texas. I'm using 97 for them, I think, on Wednesday, but then it comes down after that.
Right. We here in town today, in fact, it's interesting. We're coming up on 9 o'clock Central Time, and it's still 79 degrees at our in-city site at Camp Mabry, the National Weather Service ASOS historic climate site there. Still 79 at this hour. We got up to 90 there today. It was 88 at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Real close to records, by the way, at both those locations. And it looks like highs in the 70s, lows in the 40s and 50s. Yay! For the end of the week and into the weekend. Yeah.
I guess, Kim, you'll get that air too, huh?
Oh yeah, we've already started to get it. This morning was in the low 50s, and there was a very palpable sense of celebration. Very much enjoying this welcome entrance into fall.
And Jen, you're going to stay in some cool air for a while, aren't you?
Yeah, it's been soggy and chilly. We've had over 2 inches of rain over the past 24 hours or so. So it's been pretty wet here, and we'll get a couple of days of cool, but starting to see my first 30s. And I think we're pretty much done with any 70s and stuff now until maybe May. That's how it rolls here in Ohio. Yeah. So it's going to be pretty chilly, but not too bad. Just real windy right now. And we're going to get dry the next couple of days.
Paul, where are you? I should have heard this earlier. Where are you and what's your weather doing now?
Yeah, so I'm in central North Carolina. So we have 3 meteorologists, and most folks in the Ntsb on the aviation side can work from home anywhere because an accident could happen anywhere. So our other meteorologist lives in St. Paul area, and the other one's in DC. So I'm in central North Carolina near Wake Forest. So Neil will know that. And I'm watching the squall line go through. I could actually hear the rain on the roof right now. I'm actually, and you guys talk about the WeatherBrains passing the severe weather baton between all of you. And I think I have all of you beat, because we had hail hit our property about 5 years ago. We had a QLCS spin up and take down a fence line and trees 2 Januaries ago. And then at the beginning of the summer, we had a lightning strike hit right near the house and actually tore up our internet. And so I'm at my church right now, but it blew plastic off the siding, like 30 or 40 feet away, and hit the trip line for the internet, which is still kind of not functioning well. So I haven't quite got the cold that Troy got, but I've got the other 3. So
wow. All right. Well, let's shift over to picks of the week. This is where everybody on the show here will share something that is weather related that might be of interest. And let's go to Kim for her pick of the week. She's always got a good one.
Well, this week I kind of poked the bear a little bit, but I felt remiss if we didn't mention this on the show this week. People who are especially integrated in the storm chasing community of meteorology will be familiar with this. This was all the conversation this weekend. It appeared that the Center for Severe Weather Research, CSWR, had gotten itself in a little bit of financial trouble, and especially in the management of some of its grants from NSF, NOAA, and NASA. And the DOJ ended up intervening, doing a little bit of investigation. So I've linked to the report for that. Apparently, Josh Worman, who was central to all of that, has responded, saying that some of it was just that CSWR is a small shop. Their accounting practices maybe weren't what they should have been. He sort of denied most of the allegations of intentional wrongdoing. But nonetheless, for those of us who especially love going storm chasing and seeing the Dopplers on wheels out there, you'll be sad to know that CSWR as an entity has apparently dissolved as a result of all of this. And some of its lead scientists have gone elsewhere. The Dows from CSWR, I believe, have gone to the University of Illinois, and Karen Kasiba now is in an assistant faculty position, I think, at UIUC. So things are kind of moving around a little bit in that part of the field, and that was a bit of drama that many people probably followed as it was unfolding over the last couple of days.
All right. The WeatherBrains crew should have brought one of those Doppler on wheels. I mean, we could use that. I mean, that would be, we could put our logo on the side, and just
we might know where you can pick one up cheap.
Yeah. All right. So my pick of the week, Troy, Tim Heller used to work in Houston.
Absolutely. Good guy. Yeah.
Yeah. He kind of retired from television. He's doing some virtual coaching and some consulting. And he had a very interesting piece about data visualization and the overused rainbow color table, which I found very interesting. And I really think he's onto something here. So anyway, all these picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. All right, Jen, we're now tossing to you for your pick of the week. Go.
My pick is the Greene County, Ohio Historical Society. One of my chipmunks, Nick, came out here from school for the weekend to go there with me to interview the executive director, Catherine Wilson. She was amazing. She lived through the 1974 Xenia, Ohio tornado. She lived at Arrowhead, and she was 9 years old, and she told us her story. She told us the whole story of the town, went to the Historical Society, and they had different artifacts, some of the rubble, a piece of piping that had been twisted out of one of the homes, and different things like that. It was very fascinating, and just oodles of images that, and we're going to enhance the summary that we have on the website. We're going to make it bigger and tell more personal stories. And then she actually had family members that had gone through the 2000 tornado that went through Xenia as well. And so it was a great trip. So if you're ever in Greene County, Ohio, please go visit Catherine. It's a neat little place. The library was awesome. We got some great information from there as well. They actually have a really neat little brewery. I did not have a beer there, but I did pick up a 6-pack of IPA from the Devil Winds Brewery. And so it's just a neat little town. I'd never been there before, and I only live about an hour or so away. So check it out. And hopefully that will be the first of many trips to historical societies for Tornado Talk. That's it. That is my wheelhouse. I love it. And I could be in a library all day and a historical society. So that's the plan. I would like to visit more. My next trip, I'm going to try to go out to Pennsylvania, but in Ohio, I'd like to go to Van Wert because they have been hit by a couple of big ones. And I'd like to just go visit the town and meet the people.
And that immersing yourself into the lives and the culture of folks that have been affected by tornadoes, you learn so much, and you are doing it right. That's outstanding. All right, so Neil, let's roll over to you. What's your pick of the week?
Well, before I jump to my pick of the week, I did want to give a quick shout out to the National Weather Service Employees Organization. They invited me to speak at their annual convention last week, so that's where I was last Monday. Had a fantastic time, a great bunch of people, really, really appreciated having the opportunity to sort of tell them what was really on my mind post NOAA. So it was cathartic for me, and I think informative for them. So my pick of the week is the National Data Buoy Center. And I found myself hanging out on this site over the last couple of days just to see if the Euro and the GFS would actually verify with the pressure on that low. And they did. The models, all the global models did a fantastic job with this low. It was a record-breaking low. And if you get a chance, go check out the link to one of the buoys. I can't remember the number of it, but if you click on a couple of the different National Data Buoy Center buoys there off the Pacific Northwest, you'll find the one I'm talking about. It shows a time series of the pressure and the seas, and it's pretty impressive how fast the pressure drops.
Wow, that is fascinating. And again, we'll put a link to that buoy site up on weatherbrains.com. Aubrey had to run. It's the top of the hour. She's on television, but her pick is a National Geographic article on the deepest earthquake recorded and why it's still being investigated. All right, Troy, what you got for us? Go.
Well, being the publicity arm for Daryl Hertzman and the Iowa Environmental Mesonet, this is one thing, and I know that Neil will know a little about this, and most of us do, and I happen to be a National Weather Service cooperative observer. I've done that for the last 15 years at this site where I am. That information is gathered generally on a hydrological day basis, or first thing in the morning, 12 Zulu, 7 o'clock Central Time, all around the country. And so many people are actually doing that. But that data is really tough to get. You can get it through, the National Climatic NCEI, you can get it. But let me tell you what Daryl has done. And this is the thing I asked him to do, and he's really busted his rear end getting it done. We now have these available because they're all in a collective, and those are tough to find, those RR3 products. He has actually broken that out now, and I'm providing the link to my specific site, but it has pull downs by state and by the chef coder for the co-op sites. And he has now gotten not only the raw RR3 data, but decoded information for the day just above it. And so if you look at the web address that I've given you, James and Bill, you can see my site, but it's very easy to go to the top. You get to look at a year's worth of data at a time. And you can see the raw data that I put in every day, plus the decoded information. And Daryl is going to be back building this data as soon as he gets this where you can do it. I've actually given this to a couple of the WFOs, to the people who work co-op, the climate focal points and the co-op focal points. And this has been something, it's just been so buried in collectives that it's been hard to see the data. So I think this is really going to be something great. I think Daryl has really done, as usual, an amazing job.
Daryl is indeed a fine American. Go ahead, Neil.
I just want to say thank you to Daryl and everyone else who maintains the Buffkit warehouse.
Yeah.
I might be.
It rocks.
Hopefully there's other people that appreciate this as much as I do, but I love that software and I'm addicted to it.
Yeah.
It rocks. Good old Buffkit. It's good. It's still good. Good to the last drop. All right. I see Paul is just itching to get his pick in here. I see it in the chat room. Paul, go. I like it.
All right, so I have two picks of the week, and then I'll leave you with some entertaining PIREP remarks. First pick of the week will be a link to the safety study where the turbulence report, you can find that, and links to other safety studies that we've done. The other one is a link to the Southwest Aviation Weather Safety Workshop in Albuquerque, New Mexico next week. It's put on by the southern and western region of the National Weather Service. They do it every couple of years at different sites, and it's an amazing gathering of pilots, weather service, and air traffic controllers all sharing information to make things safer. And so I provide the link for that, and I'm sure there will be the presentations from that will be online for those that can't make it, but I thought I'd bring some PIREPs. So here are some of the favorites over the years that we've had. In the remarks section, one has had some screamers in the back. Pilot remarks, "It's bad, don't do it." One was riding a mountain wave. First officer had white caps in his coffee.
Wow, that's awesome.
And then I'll leave you with the last one. It's jiggling my flab, but that sort of feels good though.
Wow. That's show title material all over that. Wow.
So use as you want.
I think I'm offended.
That's outstanding. All right, Bill Murray, go pick you the week and the guests to come.
Yeah, just in time. Is it that or get a catheter put in?
Show title.
There you go. I tried to come up with one here at the last minute, but yeah, I've got a great New York Times piece on how the Dixie Fire created its own weather, and some outstanding photography, video, and 3D animation that is just wonderful. You'll love it. My alternate pick is that story from Sports Illustrated about Brian Snitker. If you get a chance, if you love baseball, you'll love that story. It's been an awesome show tonight. We heard back from the publicist for the movie, and it's actually a nice note. I was kind of worried when I opened it, but they did apologize. There was a scheduling error, and they're circling around to figure out how to get Travis back on the show, which was the main thing we wanted anyway, was to talk to him, and that'll be fun. Next week we have the inestimable Chuck Doswell and Tim Marshall both with us to have a little tribute for Al Mohler. Got a really great show on the 8th talking about, God and tornadoes. Nick Walker's going to join us, John Knox, the gentleman who wrote a book, and the documentary, James, that you were in, that filmmaker is going to be with us that night. And I think that's going to be a really interesting show. And I've asked Morgan Palmer to come on the 15th, so we'll see how that goes. Haven't heard back from him yet. And then I'm really excited about the show on November 22nd. Tristan Gooley, a British writer, has a book called The Secret World of Weather, and it's really, really good. So I think it's going to be very fun. And mark your calendars for Christmas Eve, because our Christmas Eve show will be a very unique and fun, memorable thing that may become a WeatherBrains tradition. And that's all I'll say right now, James.
Ooh, that's a good tease. So Paul, do you need to plug anything? Anything else we need? You were a great guest. We had,
thank you,
we could have talked all night. It was great. Anything you need to plug?
NTSB stuff? Yeah, ntsb.gov, and then the link I provided to the safety studies there is wonderful. So, and glad to partner as we move forward with anybody to help save folks. So.
There you go. Well, it's been a really, really good show tonight. If you'd like to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. Our new email officer, Jen, will be anxiously awaiting your email. But a lot of people watch us. We typically do the show Monday night at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern. A lot of folks watch it live.bigbrainsmedia.com. But we know that most of you listen. We thank you for doing that. So again, email@weatherbrains.com. The show notes are on the website, weatherbrains.com. Picks of the week, notes from the show, all of that. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless. Thanks, everybody. That was a great show. This was good.
great.
Fun.
Thank you,
Paul. You were great.
Absolutely.
Thank
Nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you too.
Come
Give our
soon,
best to
Paul.
your church.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pouring over. It's not leaking